Welcome to Overnight Market Brief, Pre-Market Edition by AGI Era. Good morning. Today is Thursday, January 22nd, 2026, and it is shortly after 8 a.m. Eastern Time. This is your executive summary of global market developments, analyzing the overnight flows in Asia and Europe, the key macro drivers, and the setup for the North American Open. The prior session and macro context. First, a look back at yesterday's close. Wall Street finished firmly in risk-on mode, driven by an easing of geopolitical tensions and tariff fears. The S&P 500 settled at 6876, up 1.16%, while the Nasdaq 100 advanced 1.36% to close at 25327. Crucially, the session was driven by a broad-based relief rally, but the real story right now is in the macro assets. Right now, the 10-year Treasury yield is trading at 4.255%, up 0.21%, reflecting a slight uptick in rate expectations. The U.S. dollar index is marginally lower at 98.5, down 0.06%, while crude oil is under pressure, down 1.95%, around 59.44. Gold is also trading lower at 448.64, down 0.35%. The slight rise in yields, coupled with a marginally weaker dollar and notable decline in crude oil, suggests a complex interplay of factors. While risk sentiment has improved on geopolitical news, the drop in oil could signal underlying demand concerns or a shift in inflation expectations. Overnight session, Asia and Europe. Moving to the overnight session, global markets have been generally positive, albeit with varied regional performance. In Asia, the picture was unified in its positive direction. In Tokyo, the Nikkei 25 finished up 1.73%, tracking broader risk-on sentiment and a slightly weaker yen. Meanwhile, in Greater China, the Hang Seng advanced 0.17%, while the Shanghai Composite gained 0.14%. The positive sentiment across Asian equities was largely influenced by the de-escalation of U.S.-European tariff concerns, despite an unexpected contraction in Korea's Q4 GDP and ongoing concerns about China's property sector. In Europe, major indices are trading with a positive bias, likely extending the relief rally from the U.S. session. The price action suggests cautious optimism, providing a constructive lead-in for U.S. traders. U.S. futures in the open. Turning to the U.S. pre-market, equity futures are trading higher. S&P 500 futures are trading up 0.52%, while Nasdaq 100 futures are up 0.82%. The relative outperformance of Nasdaq 100 futures suggests investors are rotating back into growth and technology stocks, a typical response to easing geopolitical uncertainty and a slightly weaker dollar. Looking ahead to the session, investors are focused on three key catalysts. First, the de-escalation of U.S.-European tariff tensions remains a primary driver, having fueled the overnight rally in equity futures. Second, market participants will continue to assess global economic data, particularly the implications of Korea's Q4 GDP contraction and Australia's surprising jobless rate slide for the broader global growth outlook. And finally, the ongoing movements in macro assets, specifically the decline in crude oil prices and the slight weakening of the U.S. dollar, will be closely watched for their impact on inflation expectations and corporate earnings. Given the overnight setup in rates and the dollar, the market's path of least resistance appears to be higher, pending any surprises from the data releases. That concludes your overnight market brief. Disclaimer: this podcast is not financial advice. Data may be delayed or inaccurate. Always conduct your own due diligence.